Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Winecast. I'm experimenting with something a little different in this cast than I usually do, in that I'm deliberately tackling a controversial subject in the wine world, rather than focusing on just providing neutral, objective information about wine. I've wanted to do something like this for a while because the truth is that I'm not neutral about all aspects about the wine world. And there are several controversial positions out there that I think are the right ones, and avoiding taking them has kept me from casting on a number of subjects that I really want to, like terroir, natural wine, and biodynamism. I think I'm being as fair and as careful with the information out there as I can, but I'm staking positions that not everyone agrees with, and I hope that doing so generates some good, thoughtful, and honest discussion, in this case about the use of grape concentrates as an additive in wine. So let's start by observing that despite the romantic description that you hear a lot of wine as grapes and yeast in a bottle, there's actually quite a bit that it's legal to add to those two ingredients to help get your final wine. This list, taken from the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations, gives, depending on how you count, 68 or so different things that can be used to treat wine in the United States, and the regulations in place for other wine-producing nations are similar in length. The potential additives on this list can come off as a bit intimidating, maybe even frightening, especially the ones with lots of letters and gnarly Greek and Latin roots. And this list deserves and will someday get its own dedicated cast, but for right now, we can just note that all of these substances are voluntary additions used at the discretion of the winemaker, and as advocates of natural winemaking, another subject for a future dedicated cast, will tell you, you can make a wine without any of them, and definitely with at least fewer and less of them. Also, all of these additives are regulated as to the amount that can be used and the amount that can remain in the wine. And none of these additives is meant to change the basic character of the wine. In other words, a wine that's had additives like this used on it should still taste like wine, and still is wine, even if some critics feel it tastes overprocessed and not indicative of terroir, to borrow a phrase. Instead, these treatments are used largely to promote and manage fermentation, manage the acid and tannin profiles of the wine, stabilize and clarify the wine's nose, appearance, and palate, manage specific wine faults, and to help preserve the wine from spoilage. Though they don't appear on the list that I cited, water and sugar can be additives too, with, depending on whether it's legal in the place where the wine is made, water being used to lower the overall alcohol by volume of the wine, and sugar, again if it's legal, added before fermentation to boost the final alcohol level of the wine. Speaking of sugar, it's also possible to add reserved unfermented grape must to a wine after fermentation to raise its final sugar level in a process called back sweetening that you'll sometimes hear expressed with the German word Süßreserve. Like I said, all or most of these anyway will eventually get their own dedicated cast, but there's a class of additives to wine that I want to talk about today that I find particularly curious, partly because of how much controversy they generate, and partly because of issues they raise related to the aesthetics of wine and how much transparency there should be when it comes to disclosing what goes into a wine. The class of additives I'm talking about is grape concentrates, and we can talk about them by talking about their most controversial poster child, the luridly named Mega Purple. Mega Purple, or more accurately Mega Natural Purple, and other concentrates like it, is interesting because, thanks in part at least to the name that it ended up with, honestly the only way the marketing department could have made things worse was by calling it Frankenpurple, it and other concentrates are perceived as the ultimate and unnatural laboratory-made substances that strike at the very essence of what it means for something to be called wine. But despite this perception, you'll notice that it didn't appear in the list of regulated additives to wine because it's very much unregulated, since at heart it's just grape juice that's been concentrated by cooking it down in a partial vacuum environment to preserve some of the juice's fresh flavors. It's made by Canandaigua Concentrates in California, which is a division of the very large Constellation Brands beverage company. They make it by concentrating the juice of the ruby red grape, a Tenturier or red-fleshed grape with red juice as opposed to the clear juice of most wine grapes, that was bred in 1958 by Dr. Harold Olmo of the University of California, Davis, as a hybrid from a cross between the Tenturier Alicante Gonzan and the vinifera grape Tinta Cao that you might remember from the casts on port. Mega Purple is extremely concentrated, extremely sweet. It clocks in at around 68 bricks, or close to 3 times the sweetness of most wine grapes at harvest, and extremely expensive, selling for somewhere between $135 to $200 per gallon. But a little goes a long way, since it's usually added to wine at a concentration of about 0.2%. It adds color, specifically a deep purple tone, no surprise given the name, as well as some sweetness and roundness to the mouthfeel of the wines that it's added to. It can also help mask sharp tannins in the wine, as well as green grass or bell pepper notes from excessive pyrazines. In short, it can help manage or cover up shortcomings from poor quality fruit or careless winemaking in the appearance, nose, and palate of a wine. Mega Purple is probably the most popular and widely used of the concentrates, but it's not the only one, and Canandaigua Concentrates also makes a Mega Natural Nutra Red. Someone really needs to talk to their marketing department. And there are others available from other producers. Mega Purple is wildly controversial as a wine additive. I'm not kidding, just do a web search and brace yourself. But why? Two broad reasons stand out in the criticisms that I've read. First, it's regarded by many drinkers and critics as a cheat of sorts that allows producers to cover up shoddy work in either or both the vineyard and the winery that left the wine thin or otherwise unbalanced. Second, since Mega Purple and other concentrates are made from specific grape varieties that taste and smell like something, these concentrates taste and smell like something too. And even though they're used in very small amounts, they do impart those flavors and aromas, at least a little bit, to every wine that they're added to. The concern here is that this kind of flavor and aroma addition across different wines will end up giving consumers the impression that all red wines, at least, taste and smell more alike than they actually do, and worse, lead to certain expectations about appearance, taste, and smell that won't be there when consumers try wines that haven't been treated with the concentrates. These concerns are worth a serious look, but it might be good first to try to get a sense of how common concentrates like Mega Purple are likely to be in the wine that you're buying. The answer is that nobody really has a good idea, since there's no requirement to indicate that you used a concentrate in the wine on the label. In fact, there's no requirement to indicate much of any of the permitted additives to wine except for sulfites, sort of. This dearth of knowledge, though, hasn't stopped people from making guesses, and a lot of these guesses are excessive by any standard. You'll hear claims by wine writers, and again, I'm not joking about this, that virtually every bottle of wine under $20 or at least under $10 produced in the United States has some concentrate in it, and when producers of inexpensive wines deny that they use it, you'll be told that they're going full Claude Rains on you and that they just don't want to admit the truth. But in the comments section of a post in the Gray Report wine blog in 2010 that I'll link to in the information section of this video, winemaker Adam Lee of Siduri Wines in California did some math and calculated that, since at the time Canandaigua Concentrate estimated that about 20% of its total of 50,000 gallons of Mega Purple was sold to the wine industry, with the remaining 80% going to other areas in the food and beverage industry. That means that 10,000 gallons were available for use in wines. At a concentration of 0.2 or 0.2%, that amount could treat 5 million gallons of wine. That may seem like a lot, but at the time, around 575 million gallons of wine were produced in the U.S., about half of which were still red wines, the kind of wine that would be treated with Mega Purple, as opposed to white or sparkling wines. So, about 2% of U.S. wines could have been treated with Mega Purple at that time, assuming, of course, that all of the concentrate sold was used. And even counting the use of other concentrates, that number would not likely rise above 5%. So it's out there, but it's not an epidemic. Still, what about the controversy surrounding concentrates like Mega Purple? Well, like I promised earlier, I have an opinion on it, and I'll spend just a couple of minutes on my soapbox sharing it. The concern about cheating is a concern that resonates with me, but it's important to be clear that that concern is grounded in a particular way of looking at wine that emphasizes both authenticity and connoisseurship. In other words, if you primarily look at wine as something to be experienced in a deep and intentional way, then it's understandable why you'd be suspicious of additives or interventions that might get between you and what's going on in the wine. A lot of naturalist winemaking is grounded in this idea, and while I'm okay with more interventions and additives than most naturalistas are, most of the time when I drink wine, I want to taste and smell wine, not grape concentrate. But, and this is important to remember, a lot of people don't approach wine that way. For many, the complexities and uniqueness of wines aren't what drinking is all about. Instead, they want something that's pleasant to drink, is a nice social lubricant, and if consumed in moderation, leaves them feeling good. And if a little grape concentrate helps with the pleasant-to-drink part, that's fine for them. It's tempting if you subscribe to the first way of looking at wine to look at the second way and see it as flawed or inferior. But from a philosophical point of view anyway, it's really hard to show why it would be inferior instead of just different. It's also worth keeping in mind that wine has a long, and I mean long, history with additives for flavor enhancement and even for flavor addition. Mostly because most wines from the beginnings of winemaking until just a few centuries ago didn't taste very good or last very long on their own because winemaking as a process and the importance of hygiene to it weren't well understood. Heck, the Romans and a bunch of other wine-drinking cultures even had their own version of megapurple, called either carenum de frutum or sapa, depending on how concentrated it was made. This was grape must that was boiled down to produce a syrup that could sweeten and add body and color to wine and to other foods and drinks. And the Romans loved the stuff, even at the highest levels of their tradition of connoisseurship. If you think about it, the culture of authenticity and naturalness in wine is only as strong as it is today because we've finally reached a point in wine science and technology where it's possible to make wines with minimal intervention that are actually consistently drinkable. Talk about irony. Personally, I'm more worried about the effect that concentrates can have in masking the character of wines, especially varietal wines. The issue reminds me of a conversation I had with a producer of very high quality and very delicious aged tequila, who complained that the addition of caramel and vanilla flavors to cheap tequilas led consumers to expect over-the-top notes of vanilla and caramel in his top quality offerings, and then to be disappointed when they didn't find them. And that's unfortunate, since in both wine and tequila, added flavor and color can set up false expectations in consumers. Inexpensive California Pinot Noir, which can be pretty dark in color and jammy, is often accused of being doctored with concentrates, but the problem is that without disclosure and labeling requirements for additives to wine, it's not clear how much of this color and jamminess is from concentrates, or possibly from the legal addition of up to 25% other grapes than the labeled varietal, and how much is from the fact that Pinot can get very ripe in California. The real issue, it seems to me, is that labeling requirements for wine additives don't provide sufficient transparency for what's going into wine. As someone who values a light touch in winemaking to a certain degree, I'd like to know more about what's going into the wine I buy, and perhaps a little more about how it's processed even. And I think all consumers would benefit from knowing exactly what's in the bottle as they form, whether they know they're doing it or not, their impressions of what different wines taste like and smell like. How much transparency there should be and how it should be enforced are complicated issues worthy of a long discussion, but it's time to get that discussion going. Thanks for joining me for another Winecast. Like I said in the introduction, I plan on tackling other issues like this one, and I hope they generate some interesting discussion. So please don't be shy about leaving a comment on this or any other subject. I hope this cast was both enjoyable and enlightening, and if it was, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm your host, the Unknown Winecaster, and I'm out. Enjoy the grape, but always enjoy it responsibly.